Welcome to Creative Conversations. I'm Roger Humphrey. In this episode, I'm pleased to welcome author Rachel Rossano. Rachel's books are romance and fantasy that encompass, well, she explains it a lot better than I do. So come on in, spend some time with us. Before we get started, please hit the subscribe or follow buttons. It's free and easy to do, but it helps out the channel a lot. Thank you. We're welcoming Rachel Rossano to the show. And I thank you again for coming on. I really appreciate it a lot.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for inviting me. I
Oh,
appreciate it.
yes. So I'm kind of looking over your stuff as best I can, and I'm a slow study.
That's okay.
But you basically you write fantasy romance novels. Is that correct?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Can you kind of elaborate on that a little bit?
I have two pen names. So I have my name and then I have a new pen name I established in about 2021, I think.
Okay.
So under my original pen name, it's something that a friend of mine has coined kingdom fiction, because it doesn't have any magic involved, but it is established in a fantasy world. And mine is very medieval inspired in general. So I take a lot of inspiration from history and from how the cultures were at different points and meld it all into my own world and set my characters on that stage and have a lot of fun. That's my original stuff I've been writing since the early 2000s. And then my new pen name is more fantasy. It's a classic fantasy. There's magic, there's elves, there's fantastical creatures, there's a lot of other stuff, there's a whole magic system. And that is under my pen name, Alyssa Ray. So I've been doing that one more recently because I was trying to branch out and try to do new things, try a new formula, and I'm enjoying both. So I'm planning on still writing under both.
That's great. That's great. So it's like the secret name that everybody knows.
Yes, it's an open secret, is what I say. It's an open secret. Part of the reason is because my original fan base tend to be very conservative, Christian, that's most of my majority of my fan base
Uh-huh.
under my Christian name. And so they are very no magic, no fantasy of that
Oh,
kind.
yeah,
And so I didn't want to alienate them, but
sure.
also I wanted to be sensitive to their convictions.
Of
And
course.
so I figured if I write fantasy, more classic fantasy under my own name, those who are under the new name, those who like that kind of stuff, who like my old stuff, will easily be able to transition and just say, hey, I like this too. And those who don't and have stricter preferences, they know they can still go back to my old pen name or my old name
Uh-huh.
and get books that fit their preferences, and they don't have to be worried about running across something that they would find offensive or uncomfortable. So I figured this way it's an open secret and they can make the choice.
I think that's good to be
Yeah.
able to make that differentiation
Yes.
between the two.
Yes.
Um, and yeah, I think it's probably a very good idea to be able to do something like that. Now, the under your name,
Hmm.
yeah, you said that you have a Christian base. Are these Christian books? Are they
They are not so they are
well,
not what you would consider a classic Christian book.
uh-huh.
Some of them have more of a Christian message, but in general, they are more like a Christian worldview.
Okay.
So, I have a Christian system within my world with different terms for different things. And so I have a representative of God there. The theology is the same as what I believe.
Uh-huh.
But at the same time, the purpose of the book is not to convert, or it's more of along the lines of telling a good story.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I don't the reason so I when I first started writing, I wrote because I enjoyed writing. This is when I
Uh-huh.
was a teenager.
Sure.
And I found the stuff I liked writing doesn't fit any genre, at least at that point. And so I couldn't, when I started researching how to go and publish, I couldn't find a publisher who was interested in my kind of books because it didn't fit anybody else's box. Because they are all looking for certain things, and my books either didn't have them or had too much of something. And so I was like, okay. So eventually, indie publishing was very new when I started. I kind of fell into it, made a whole bunch of mistakes, learned from my mistakes, and grew quite a bit. So now this is what I do solely is indie publish myself. But yeah, it's more of a decision based on it didn't fit anybody else's box than anything else. And then
Yeah.
I've come to enjoy it.
And you're able to stay true to yourself
Yes,
without
yes,
trying to manipulate your style to fit
right.
somebody else's vision. So
Yeah, yeah.
I know that in my world of music, it's been much the same thing forever.
Hmm.
I think if the Beatles had followed the advice of their producers, they never would have made their second album. So
Yeah. I the business has changed so much even since when I started. It's and it's come a long way. Like when I first started self-publishing, they kind of everybody was like it was a shameful thing to self-publish. That meant you couldn't get published traditionally.
uh-huh.
Your work wasn't good enough. You were one of those radical people that did subpar work. And I
And
worked
you can
really
only
hard.
sell to friends and family.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And it's come a long way now. I do not sell to only friends and family. And the industry has come a long way. So it is no longer a no word in publishing. You can some people who were traditionally published have gone self-publishing because you can make more money and you have more control. And especially if you already have an established fan base, you can go a lot farther as an indie than you can as a traditional
So
because there's a lot less people taking a cut.
yeah, I hear that. What about like editing? Do you do your own or do you hire an outside editor?
I hire an outside editor and I also go through I have developed a very strict editing process. I have an alpha reader who reads while I'm writing the book, gives me feedback on how the story's going, clarity, consistency, that kind of stuff. Then I usually, when I finish my first draft and I've done my initial editing, which is a lot of, I go through it like 5 times before I hand it to anybody else. Um, then I send it out to a group of beta readers. I have quite a few that are like consistently every time I publish a book or in the process they want to read it. They
Uh-huh.
look for different things. They ask me what I'm looking for, and I tell them this is what I'm looking for. These are my concerns. And they get them back to me. I go through the book and process all their suggestions, all the possible changes. My husband reads it. He's an engineer. This is not his genre. But he reads it, he gives me feedback, and then I send it off to the editor. And so the editor gets a pretty polished piece. So by the time the editor gets it, she's not running into as many typos or as many, inconsistencies or plot problems. It's more like, okay, you're going through and she'll flag the big things or the little things that she sees. And then even then I go through after I go through her edits, I still do a final read through. So by the time I've published this book, I probably have read it like 12 times very
Wow.
closely. So by the time it gets to where I'm formatting and uploading it, it has been very scrutinized on multiple levels. And things still get through, but in traditional publishing, published books, things still get through too.
Sure,
So
they do. We've all
yeah,
seen them.
yeah, it's
So,
not going to be perfect, but you can get as close as you possibly can.
what about distribution and how do you get it out to people?
Um, I publish using KDP, which is Kindle Direct Publishing.
Okay.
It's the Amazon platform. I also, depending on if I'm taking the book wide or just Kindle. If it's Kindle Unlimited, it has to be just on Kindle for the ebooks. Can't be anywhere else because Amazon has this exclusivity thing. If you're going to get this extra little bit, you have to be exclusive. For a long time, I didn't do that. I only started doing that since the early 2000s or early 2020s. Um, so I did an experiment. Things went really well. I'm like, okay, so for right now, we're doing this. Before, I used to do everything wide, which meant I would publish with Barnes and Noble, Apple, Google Books, all the other places, Smashwords. Now Smashwords and Direct to Digital are the same company, but I used to do Direct to Digital. I would do it all these different places. So I would upload it like 6 or 7 different places for the ebooks. For the paperbacks, I usually do pretty much exclusively through KDP, but they will like Barnes and Noble can order paperbacks from Amazon if you requested them at the store. Um, it's available on the Amazon website. If I needed to sell books directly, I can always order a whole bunch of author copies, and then I can sell books directly. Like I have pretty much like 5 to 6 copies of each of my books, except for the last, I think 3. I Life was crazy this past year, so I haven't done it yet. And I usually would do like a book special sale going, hey, you get this many books for this price. If you guys want to fill in your paperback collection, you can buy them straight from me.
So digital seems to be the way to go then.
It is the most lucrative. I wouldn't advise going straight and only digital though, because there are a lot of paperback enthusiasts out there.
Right.
And there are hardback enthusiasts, and I haven't really tried to invest into doing hardbacks right now. I'm watching the industry, and Amazon is now offering options. Draft to Digital is offering hardback options, I think. Don't quote me on that one.
Okay.
But there are hardback options out there. My life's been too crazy, so I haven't been able to explore that part of the market right now. But I hope to someday offer hardback special event editions of my books. So,
Are any of these signed? Would you, it's like if somebody
if you
wanted
buy them, if you buy them straight from me, they'll be signed. You can ask
a signed
for me
copy?
to sign them, and I can give you signed copies. Yes.
Well, some people that's important.
Yes, it is. Yeah, I have a number of readers who, with each new book, will contact me and politely ask, when is the paperback coming out? When will you be able to give me a signed copy? When can I buy it? And those are the people I try to do that little sale once a year and say, hey, I'm now ordering books. So how many do I need to order? When do you need them? We figure that all out.
It's very
So
gratifying, I'm sure.
yes, it's nice.
So how do you market?
I do a lot of online marketing. So I have done other things in the past, but I have not had a good return on them. So I quit putting my efforts into that. So I do a lot of um book tours, blog tours.
Oh,
So sign up for a blog tour. I've done Instagram tour. So
wow.
where I sign up a company, they have a whole bunch of, I can't remember what the name of it, but basically Instagrammers who focus on books, who are willing to either review or to post about it. And they will ask if they're interested, they sign up, and then they send all the information to them. And then over like about 5-day period, all of them post about it all at the same time.
Wow.
And so I get a little bit of a push there. I've done Facebook ads. Those have not always turned out very well. I do a lot of networking on Facebook. I used to do more on Twitter. Don't do it right now. Or X, sorry.
Yeah. Yes. We
And
all still call it Twitter, don't we? You know,
yes,
it's
we
hard to
do.
say X. It's just like Twitter. I
It
get
is.
Twitter. X is like,
Yeah. And then how
what?
do you turn that into a verb?
Yeah.
Xing?
I've, I've X'd.
Yes. So yeah, I haven't been on Twitter that much. I do have stuff. I have my websites. I have pages. I have a fan, like sort of a fan page on Facebook for both names. When I am getting ready to release a book, I have a whole checklist of things I go through. So I do most of my pushing before a book release. So
Sure.
I have a street team is what you call it, where you have a group of people who've signed up to get pre news or early news or information about what's going on behind the scenes. And I have a street team for both names in one group. And when I'm starting to get close to publishing a book, I talk about the fact, okay, I finished the rough draft. It's in editing now. Here's the cover. What do you think? I look for feedback for the cover because I do my own cover design. Um, I ask for feedback about the blurb. I ask for people who are interested in sharing the news. Like if I'm doing I'm releasing the cover, ahead of time to say, hey, look, pretty color cover. New book coming. Isn't this exciting? Aren't you interested in reading it? I will ask part of that team and say, is anybody interested in posting about this on your page, your personal page, or posting around in the groups that you're part of that might be interested in this genre? And that's the beginning of my thing that I do each book. And then as I go through, I announce the date it's coming out. I set up all my promotional stuff of the book tour, the blog tour, the book Instagram tour, all that stuff. And then you just do the whole push to try to get everything exactly right before the date. And then get everything uploaded, all the little details in place, and then it's like launching the book, and then you just wait to see what happens.
Yeah, boy, I get that.
Try
So,
not to worry about it while it's happening because it's
oh yeah,
nerve-wracking going
yeah,
through
it'll make you
that.
crazy. I publish a new episode of the podcast about every week,
Yes,
and I look at the numbers
yes,
about 5 hours after I put it up just to see if anybody has looked at it at all. And
yeah,
after that, I start working on next week's show.
yes, exactly, yes. And it's
Start.
like lately, because I published last year, I only published 2 books, I think. But there was one year I published like 3 or 4, and that
Wow.
was an intense year. And
Boy, I guess.
I got to the point where I was just like, I'm not looking. My husband, meanwhile, watches the numbers like a hawk. But I'm like, I'm not looking. I just don't want to, I don't, if I don't look at it for a week or two, it's easier.
Yeah.
So, because the numbers have built up and I can see a big picture of how things are instead of sitting there going, okay, who's buying it? So, yes.
That's that's funny. That's funny. So, um, the books themselves, we can talk about that for a second, I guess.
Mhm.
The books themselves, how did you get inspired to write those things? I mean, how did you come up with your characters and the
Um,
storylines and the setting? I mean, where does all that come from?
I frequently start with a character or a few characters who their interactions or the situation seems to be interesting and something I'd like to explore. Like an introvert and somebody who's not an introvert, and putting them into a situation and watching how it plays out and figuring out how they would react to each other, and or situations sometimes that are like recently I've been writing a lot of in the past few years, either fairy tale inspired or fantasy inspired. So I've been getting a lot of ideas from fantasy, myths,
Hmm.
that kind of stuff, and then putting my own twist on them. Or saying, hey, well, what if I changed this aspect of the story that would up the tension and make it more interesting to see how it all play out? Or what if this character is slightly different in this way, and this character is different in this way? How would they, like spark off of each other or interact or cause a lot of interesting conversations to happen? And what if I put this goal and they have to work together to get to this goal? And that kind of thing is usually where I start, and it kind of blossoms from there with more and more details.
That sounds fascinating. So the storylines are going to feel comfortable,
Yes.
you know,
I started out,
not necessarily familiar, but
yeah,
comfortable.
yes. And that's what I've been doing recently with Alyssa Ray books is been taking things that are familiar and doing something a little different with them, but they're not losing their familiarity or the fun aspects that you really enjoyed about them when you read
Uh-huh.
them in original form. And, or at least that's for me, it's a personal, my feeling on that. And I'm finding a lot of readers enjoy that aspect.
Yeah,
So,
I
yeah,
can see that. I went to an opera that was written by a friend of mine many years ago,
yeah.
that was based on oh golly, Rip Van Winkle.
Oh, cool.
But she changed the character, so Rip was coming back 20 years later, but he was an abuser and an alcoholic,
Ooh, okay.
and
Lots of dynamics
he
there.
had basically abandoned the family, and
Ah,
and so Rip was not a nice guy, and I thought that kind of trashed the story. Now I get
yes, I
it,
was thinking the same thing.
artistically I get it, but
Yes,
it was like, oh,
that's
okay.
a lot. Yeah, it's like that's not a fun homegoing. That actually would be quite traumatizing for his family.
Fortunately, he was a good singer, so.
Well, yeah, but there's other ways you could have done that.
So, so I know I applauded the composer for doing it. It's a
Oh
hard thing
yeah.
to do, to write an opera,
Oh yeah.
but I just thought, yeah, and I get it. I mean, it's because it's
Hmm.
such a unique take on the character. I mean, whoever thought of it,
Yeah.
but at the
Yeah.
same time, it's like,
I
really?
feel for the family, man. You thought you escaped this bad relationship and now it's back 20 years later.
Yeah.
And you have to deal with all those emotions. It's really hard. Ugh. Yeah, when I first started writing, I was very much a pantser. So there's two major approaches to writing. They're not the only approaches. Pantser is more like you take an idea and you just start writing. You keep running with it and you just make it up as you go along. And a plotter is much more of a person who plans out what's going to happen in the story and you
Okay.
stick to the plan. I started out when I was originally writing as a pantser, so by the seat of your pants. Um, and I have switched over to more plotting, not completely plotting, because I
Uh-huh.
find if I know the end of the story and I know everything that's going to happen, I lose interest in writing. Um, so, but yeah, I've been that I find that pantsing or doing a combination of plotting and pantsing. So you have a little bit of a plan, but you're filling in all the details in the middle. That produces more organic stories, more instinctive stories,
Uh-huh.
more intuitive stories. So you're
Uh,
not feeling like the characters are getting dragged along by the plot.
oh,
It's
okay.
more the characters are driving the plot because they're making decisions. And those decisions have, consequences, and that feeds into the plot.
Well, I've asked other writers in the past what drives them
Hmm.
to write every day. And I remember a couple of the answers were the same, which was, "Well, I want to know what's going on. I want
Yeah.
to know what's coming up next."
Yes.
Wait a minute, this is your book. You don't know? No, I have no idea what the characters are going to do. And I thought that was a charming answer, but it's
Yeah.
also very telling
Yeah.
so that would be a pantser.
Yes, that would be a pantser. If they don't know, have any idea what's going to happen, that would definitely be a pantser. When I talk about my books, I frequently say I have this goal that I'm shooting for, and I have a
Uh-huh.
few things that I know we have to hit along the journey, but I can't tell you what's going to happen between point A and point Z, because that is the fun part, is the discovery of the interactions and the characters and how they're going to form and respond to the things I already have planned. The events that I'm like, okay, this is going to happen. This person's going to barge in and do this. What are you going to do in response? So, yes, that's my general philosophy. I love to write because I like storytelling. I like people, I like characters, I like the interactions that happen. I like people connecting. And so I enjoy, that's what I like in books I read. And I pretty much like to write books that I want to read. So that's, I don't see a lot on the market that I like. I'm very picky. So I try to write things that I see the market might want because this is something I'm looking for and I'm not seeing a lot of.
And
So
sometimes you're writing books for people and they don't know they want that style of book
yeah,
until they read it.
yeah.
Yeah, and they go, "Oh yeah,
Until
this is
yeah,
the one I've been looking for."
yeah, exactly.
That's very cool. That's very
Yeah.
cool. So I know you're a wife and a mom with all
Yes.
of those obligations as well. How do you find time to write? How do you squeeze it in
Uh,
and take care of business too?
Well, right now it's very much a challenge because life, as you know, my mom passed last year and
Uh-huh.
life has been a whirlwind ever since. So I'm
Sure.
still working on balancing things again. But I've been a homeschooling mom for my kids' whole lives. I have
Okay.
a 16-year-old and twin 13-year-olds.
Wow.
So, and we're still homeschooling. My I do this. This is my job. It's part-time.
Uh-huh.
So I fit it in the little cracks and crevices. When my kids were little, I would write during nap times. As they got older, I have worked on learning or teaching them or training them to leave me alone for certain portions of the day and say, okay, no, this is mom's writing time. You're going to have quiet time. You get, I'll give them activities. I'm not just saying, hey, I'm abandoning you. Um, and now that they're teenagers, it's a lot easier. I'm still very much available for them,
Sure.
but at the same time, they're more respectful. They're like, hey, mom's writing. I'll wait until you finish the sentence, or this can wait until later. I'll bug you later. They're very, they've grown up with mom disappearing for periods of time. How I use my time effectively is I frequently spend a lot of time thinking through things in the back of my mind during the day when I'm not writing, so that when it's time to sit down to write, I already know what I'm planning on starting with. So there's no setup time in my head. I've already done all the setup. I'm like, okay, I know this is the next event. This is what I'm planning on going next. And it's all clear in my head. So when I sit down, I can start writing right away. So if I get an hour to write, I can get maybe 1,000 words in if things are going well. And that way I'm trying to use my time effectively.
That makes sense. That
Yep.
makes sense. So, a couple of other things that I wanted to touch on, and probably should have touched on it earlier. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's
One
okay.
is audiobooks. Are you
Yes.
doing anything on audiobooks?
I just signed a contract with Tantor for my newest series. They're going to do audiobooks of the first and the second book. So I am getting my feet wet.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you. So I'm writing the second book now, so I've got to get that done. But they were interested. They contacted me, so I'm very excited to try out something new. It's something I've wanted to do, but I didn't want to do the financial and time investment for doing it myself.
Sure.
So I'm very excited about that. I also have a friend she's working on an audiobook of one of my really old stuff because she's trying to get into the audiobook creating market.
Ah,
She wants to do the voice work. And
uh-huh.
so she's using one of my books as a test. And so I'm like, hopefully I will be announcing like 3 books in the next year. Lord willing
Wow.
here.
That's very cool. That's very cool. I just think that we live in an age where as you indicated earlier, that all of the rules are changing.
They are
And
very
we
much.
have we have options and opportunities that just didn't exist
Yes.
5 years ago, 10 years ago, and certainly from my
Yes.
perspective, 20 years ago.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Those things just weren't there. So that's
Yeah, it's changing very quickly.
very quickly.
It's really crazy how
So
fast.
now, how many series of books do you have? Because your
Oh,
books are in series, correct?
yes, most of them are. I have a few standalones. So let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 or 8, maybe.
Series. Wow.
Yes.
Okay. So this is same characters in different settings or a long continuous story over a
Most,
3 or 4 volume thing.
I have one series that's the same characters through 3 books.
Okay.
And I decided when I got done with that, it was so emotionally and physically and mentally draining. I was like, I'm not doing this again because it's too much. I have to carry too much in my head, to be able to
Sure.
do it. And there's just too much background to affect each scene. By the end of the thing, it's like, okay, I'm so tired. So yeah, that's the Talented trilogy. Most of my series are usually um In the first book, you will probably run into characters that are going to be the main characters in the second or third or fourth book.
Oh, okay.
So each book sort of stands alone because it's a complete story by itself. But the story also, you have characters like, let's see, for the novels of Rynan, the main character in the first book, Thomas, his best friend is Denton. And because of because I had Thomas's book story in the first one, and Denton turned out to be a very popular character, and I liked him a lot. So I was like, okay, I'm going to put the next book is going to be Denton's book. And so the next book was Denton. And then there was a character in that book that ended up being the next book. And so that's how it usually happens with most of my series, where you run into characters in the first few books or in the previous books that will show up and become the main characters in the next book.
So you're
And you
creating,
will have old characters show up in older books.
so you're
So,
creating a universe, sort of like Marvel
yes,
or Star Wars or something
yes.
like that, that you have this,
Yeah, it's
where
a
these,
whole world,
uh-huh.
and everybody has relationships, and people are irritated with each other, and there are friendships, there are feuds, it's complex. Which every time I sit down to write a new book, I'm like, okay, I have to review every time a new character comes out. Okay, now I kind of remember, who does he like? Who does he not like? What kind of history has already happened? So I spend a lot of time back reading my old stuff or searching my old stuff for that name and going, okay, what's coming up? Remind myself what I already wrote.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm looking forward to reading some of them,
Thank you.
and see what I can do. And I want to thank you for being on the show. I really